Hey everyone. So today I wanted to talk about what is CPTSD. It's a mouthful, that's for sure, just for a bunch of letters. So everyone knows what PTSD is. It's post-traumatic stress disorder. That little C right before it stands for complex, and it really, really is complex. So it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And what most people think of when they hear PTSD, just in general, is a soldier coming back from war, a person who witnesses a car accident, maybe a woman who was raped. So it's a common term, but the C, PTSD, is not common. And actually, when we think about soldiers coming home from war, they are suffering from complex PTSD, not just PTSD. So let me explain. So PTSD is when someone suffers a trauma. So it's a singular event, and they have a hard time processing and dealing with what they saw, whether it be an emotional reaction, physical reaction, anxiety-inducing, something like that. So they have trouble processing it, and it could definitely change them forever. But what complex PTSD is, it's an initial trauma, and it could be multiple traumas, but it definitely has an initial trauma with continual abuse afterwards. So, for example, when a child has a trauma, and then let's say they are abused by their parents throughout their childhood, adolescence, that would constitute as complex PTSD, CPTSD. If a woman is in a marriage where she's being abused, that would constitute as complex PTSD. So she would have an initial trauma, and then it would be continual abuse. And when it happens to a child, for instance, and that's usually what CPTSD is mostly associated with, is happening to a child or within your childhood, it actually changes the way your brain functions, especially when it happens to a young child, because your brain is just developing as a child. So what happens is it changes your chemical makeup in your brain. Your hippocampus, your pituitary, everything gets changed. You live in a constant state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawning, and I'll get into that in another video. But with the complex part, you really have to be careful, because a lot of times whenever you go to therapy, they diagnose you with PTSD, and then they do like a subsequent treatment, which is approved by insurance companies and the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, because that's what's in the DSM-5. CPTSD is not in the DSM-5. And after doing a lot of research, I've actually discovered that the Veterans Affairs have tried to get it added to the DSM-5, and they failed. And that's because the insurance companies lobbied the APA to not get it added. And there was a lot of speculation as to why. My personal opinion is because of money. Because complex PTSD requires more therapy, which means more sessions, which means more money the insurance companies would have to dole out. We'll see. I mean, that's just my opinion. I can't state that as a fact, but it makes the most sense as to why that's happening. Because the ICD-11, which is an internationally recognized, basically a DSM-5, CPTSD is in there. And a lot of other countries actually diagnose and treat as complex PTSD, which is not a linear. So with PTSD, you usually treat it with a CBT, a cognitive behavioral therapy, or a DBT, which is a linear. They give you 6 to 18 weeks, and there's a structured regimen that you follow. But with complex PTSD, it's like pulling on a spider web. So you start with one string and you pull it. And then all of a sudden you see this other string starting to unravel somewhere else. So if you continue just pulling that one string, you're going to get a knot, right? Like it's just going to keep pulling, and then it's going to be misshapen and whatever. So you have to like stop pulling this one and start pulling on another string. It's not, like I said, it's not linear. You have to go in steps, and then you may take a step back and take a step forward and go over this way and go over that way. There's a lot of stuff to uncover. So just for example, like in my CPTSD sessions, basically we started with memory recovery, because my initial trauma happened whenever I was 4, and I've always had a memory of it slightly, but never the full trauma that I experienced. So we started memory recovery. And then that sent me down a whole other path of dissociating, which again, I will cover in another video. So we had to stop that and go to the disassociation. Then we had to concentrate on self-love and self-actualization and all of this other stuff that with PTSD, you don't really have to do, because you start with the trauma and then you go back to what life was like and what you were like before the trauma. A lot of times with someone suffering with CPTSD, there is no life before because it happened in childhood. So you have to learn to really reinvent yourself and retrain your brain on how to properly respond to life, which is why I call this surviving with CPTSD. Because you don't live, you're in a constant state of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and it can change in a moment. You could be fighting, and then in the next moment, you could freeze. You could want to flee a situation. And it's not necessarily a physical reaction. It's just a mental reaction. Like you could be in a situation to where you're being triggered. Again, something we'll discuss in another video. And all of a sudden, you're in a fight mode. You are angry. You just want to fight it. And you just want to be, bull in a china shop, right? And let's say that happens again. A trigger happens again. It's the same trigger. You could freeze. I don't want to deal with this. I fought it before. I just don't want to deal with it. And it's a constant battle throughout your entire life like this. Your brain has basically made you into a survival mode your entire life. So learning to overcome that is very difficult. So hopefully I kind of enlighten some people on what CPTSD is, because it's very important to understand that there is a huge difference between PTSD and CPTSD. That one little letter, that C, that complex, it really is complex, and you have to treat it completely differently than you would treat someone with just PTSD. So it's very important that we bring awareness to this so that way more people can get the help that they need and that they deserve. Because since it's not in the DSM-5, people are getting misdiagnosed as borderline personality disorder, DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, which is multiple personalities, and they're getting misdiagnosed with these things. Bipolar, severe depression, whatever. And I'm not saying that severe depression is a misdiagnosis in itself, but you could be suffering from CPTSD and have depression, but because it's associated with CPTSD, it's a completely different way of looking at why you're depressed and how things are working inside your brain and your body. So it makes a huge difference on the proper treatment that people get. So let's hope that we can start a conversation and really truly understand what CPTSD is and how to treat it. So I will leave links at the bottom to what CPTSD is. So if you want to do more research, there is a page, the CPTSD Foundation, which I have found extremely helpful. They break it down in such a great way. So I'll leave a link to their Facebook and their Twitter and also their website. So hopefully you guys check that out, and let's continue the conversation.